Welcome back to the show. Today we have Arjun Bhatnagar. He's the CEO of Cloaked. Arjun, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be on again.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you back on the show. You did the radio version of the show a little while ago, and I think privacy is such a huge topic right now. So many people have, get hacked or have gotten hacked, or big companies seem to be getting it. So I think this is very timely, but maybe before we get into all that, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Yeah, for sure. I am born and raised in Mass.
Well,
When grew up in North Andover, Massachusetts. Spent most of my life there. Then went to school at two colleges, Babson College and Olin College Engineering. So did business and engineering both. And then throughout my career, I've been working across a lot of companies. Got my first job when I was 10. So I've just been
cool.
working my whole life.
That's sweet. Okay, so walk us through how you came up with the idea of Cloaked and what exactly is it?
Yeah, so Cloak started because back in 2020, I was really curious about my own data and how could my data help me, and generally just thinking about what does our footprint look like. And so what I ended up doing was I bought a Mac Mini, put it in my apartment, and decided to write integrations into everything about myself, from like basic stuff like Google Calendar, my Facebook data. I hacked iMessage. I got my workout data, my eating data, movement data, GPS data, everything about me I tried to put in this box. And I have a background in machine learning, so I wrote some really basic models to study all this data and said, hey, how can you make sense of it? And what I ended up doing was I started realizing that my little crude AI started studying me and started realizing things. It realized when I missed my meetings, it said, hey, you missed your work yesterday. Between these two meetings, do 15 push-ups. Based on my spending habits, it said, hey, let's cut back on the alcohol and the Chinese food this week because I saw a big spike and increase. But it hit me in the face one day when I was at lunch with somebody. I put my phone down. End of lunch, I picked up my phone and realized my really crude AI had a full conversation with my then girlfriend. It said, I love you, sent her memes, and went back and forth. And it was that moment, I was like, wait, what just happened? And two things hit me in that moment. I said, one, wow, I don't own any of my own data, even though it's all about me. And two, I would never trust Facebook, Amazon, Google to ever make something like this, even though I love technology. So I realized privacy is a big blocker to innovation and to how the world's going to work. And I want to figure out how to solve that. And I realized B2C and the consumer is the way to go. Consumer first privacy doesn't exist. It all exists as settings and toggles that companies want to make complicated or crude. And we want to make sure that it's something that is seamless. It doesn't compromise convenience and actually can maintain privacy in a practical way.
Interesting. So what made you actually decide to actually build it? Because it's nice to have this idea in your own data, but how did you release it to kind of the rest of the world?
Yeah, so thinking about it as any product, it's like, what is the MVP? How do you start? So like the box wasn't a solution I wanted to go to market with because I knew that's too complicated and it's not an actual like solution to privacy. It's for what could privacy enable? So I started thinking about, well, could I potentially secure people's databases like a B2B? Could I potentially go towards data deletion? Could I think about better VPN type technologies? So I thought about all of it, and I realized people don't understand privacy, and it's really nebulous word. And I wanted to make it very practical and that people can understand and feel comfortable with. And so it came down to is what does comfort look like, and how do you begin there? And I realized it begins with that point when for everybody, I want to make this non-technically savvy people. So for MVP, I said, okay, where does everybody feel the problem? Where do they get it without me explaining anything? And I realized it starts with that singular moment when I asked you for your name, email, phone number, credit card, address. Everybody intuitively understood privacy. So I said, I want to start there and then build the future. And so that's why with Cloaked, I said, okay, I'm going to make sure that you never have to share your email, phone number, and now soon credit card ever again. And that's where I started. And then I used the mental model of a password manager because people really get that. They say, oh, it's a thing that saves my stuff. But Cloak can actually make it so that I don't have to share my information, but it works just like it does normally today.
Okay, so let's dive a little bit deeper into that. So I'm using Cloaks, and actually you were nice enough to let me in the early beta, so I've been using it for a while. How does that actually work? Like, okay, I don't actually give you my real phone number or email address, but how does Cloak do that?
Yeah, so when you're signing up for, let's say, a website, for example, Target removed guest checkout. You have to make an account to sign up for Target. And Target requires your email, phone number, username, or not username, email, phone number, password to go buy something. So what we've recognized with Cloaked is that there's these scenarios when you're shopping online, making an account, making a purchase, that you're asked for information repeatedly. And your information is potentially compromised, sold, or just spammed and bombarded. There's the other flip of the equation when you're talking to people in real life, talking to somebody who's sketchy or someone new for the first time, even your existing relationships. It's like, well, how do I have some granular control? Does my boss need my information all the time? So we started with the ideas like we want to make sure that wherever you give that information, it's painless and simple and it works like the way you think it would. So what we do for that Target example, we make a phone number just for Target. And Target can text you, it can call you. And one thing we wanted to make sure is also a convenient factor. So we make a number on the fly and we can fill it in Target. Same with email address. Target will call it, email it, whichever, and it routes via Cloaked. Now you can choose for that information to live only in Cloaked, or you can actually receive it in your native Gmail, native iMessage, native phone call. So that way you don't have to break your experience. You want somebody to call you to reach your phone, you can have Cloaked do that. So that's the principle of convenience I want to keep there, but maintain the security and privacy in the front. So Cloaked works like that. We'll make an email, phone number on the fly, password as well. And then as we get into cards as well, credit card numbers. But when it hits that piece of information, you can choose whether to route to your real information or respond directly within Cloaked.
Very cool. So walk us through how's credit cards going to work the same way, basically?
Yeah. So I want to take Cloaked and make it a really strong mental model that you don't, whatever you do, Cloaked will be in control. Cloaked will be in front of it, and you can be in control of it, and then you can route to whatever you actually want to. So with cards, we've worked really hard with building some big networks, some big relationship with networks and banks. So that way we could make a unique card number in front of every single vendor, every merchant. Wow. And then you can actually have spending controls, merchant locking, etc. But then you can actually route that transaction after the fact to your real card under the hood.
That's cool. That's very cool.
That's what we're working on. It requires a lot of moving pieces and a lot of discussions and agreements. It's funny enough, not as hard as a technical challenge. It's more of a big challenge of making people agree to what we're trying to do and work together with us.
Interesting. Yeah, I could see that. That makes sense. So, and I think Apple really kind of kicked this off a number of years ago, is kind of the privacy focus. And we can argue maybe where there are pros and cons of how they're doing it. But besides the point, I think the fact that a big company like them kind of put it a little bit front and center allows for an easier adoption and gets people thinking about their own privacy. How have you found that, especially when you're building a business?
Yeah, so I think Apple did a really good job of channeling the inner sentiment that people felt.
Yeah, interesting.
I think people really wanted this idea of privacy. And now the data all shows it. 79% of America is upset to outright angry that data is collected so misused. We even see now more data that 47% of people opt for privacy over convenience. It's getting almost 50-50, whether I want it for convenience or privacy, what do I value more? And I think Apple early on channeled that. And I think it came with Steve Jobs. He really focused on saying, I want privacy as a core pillar. Now, the problem with Apple is that Apple is a walled garden, locked-in ecosystem, and it's the Apple way or the highway. And I think the problem with that approach is that you to solve the problem in a meaningful way, you need to actually practically work with everybody. You can't just say, hey, we're going to do things our way, and you either do it or that's it. And I think because then privacy becomes, well, you can have privacy if you spend $5,000. You've got your MacBook, your iPhone, your Apple Watch. But then even if you do all that, God forbid you use Chrome, then the Apple won't help you. So that's the mentality we've seen that Apple's taken. But they've done a lot of good work in championing and talking about and bringing out what people want. And so for us, Apple's a great way for us to talk about and say, look, Apple's able to market and talk about what consumers are looking for. Now, they're going to do it in their way. We're going to do it one way that brings the world together to actually change, not just buy a new iPhone. And I think that's where we're excited to kind of really champion.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So for people that maybe still don't understand why it's important, you kind of covered it a little bit earlier, but what do you think people should really start caring if they don't already, and maybe give us some best practices?
Yeah, sure. So As I said, privacy is an interesting word because it's a very nebulous and ill-defined word now, and it's by design. And that actually comes back to why you should care. Big tech doesn't want you to actually, and a lot of companies don't want you to care about privacy so much because they're all rooted in a business model that's built on data aggregation, data targeting, and data and manipulation of you based on your information. The goal is that they want to sell you something or target you or figure out who you are based on data that they figured out from various sources. Now, what does that do? It does a few different things. One, practically speaking, it negatively impacts you in either ways where sometimes things either cost more or they target you towards products that you may not have additionally spent money on, maybe spent a little bit less if you worked somewhere else. Even practically speaking, where you're influenced, the way you're looking at social media, the way you're looking at the news, the way our elections are run, like what we've learned repeatedly is that the world is impacted by data surveillance and surveillance of individuals. And I don't think you want to know that one company can change the fate of the world, as we learned at the last election, just through data aggregation. And I think that's something that practically is a big thing we should be concerned about. It influences your spending, influences your behavior, and influences the way you operate day to day and your own mood. We've seen mental health challenges. We've seen the way that targeting is done. It affects the way you operate. And that's practical. And I always try to balance as it's practical. And then there's also a whole emotional side to this, which I always say is a balance of both. Emotionally, it doesn't make sense that every single company knows every single thing about you, sometimes more than you. The fact that we saw that example, it's said to bring Target up again, but that old example, I think 2018 or 2017, when a parent got a letter for new baby ads, because Target had figured out that that person was about to have a baby before the family did. And this is where it comes into where emotionally, I don't know if everything you do should live forever. You should have a say in what companies can do with your information. And I think it comes back to control. So for me, I think privacy is super important because the way our technology is evolving, one, you're going to feel more and more uncomfortable. And if you don't have control in it, technology actually is going to be hindered. We actually see this idea of OpenAI and all these AI concepts coming up that technology wants to get smarter, but it will eventually hit a limit because privacy is the biggest blocker. So we need to solve collectively as an industry and as the world, what does privacy mean? And I think it fundamentally means putting back control in your hands and feeling comfortable with how technology works. But yeah, that's just a little spiel on privacy.
No, I think it's good. I think you hit on something there that like obviously there's certain companies you don't care if they have your real email and your real phone number, right? And then there's companies that you're like, I don't want you to have any of it, and kind of everywhere in between. And I think the fact that you're giving consumers that control is really helpful. And your baby example is funny because like I have 2 kids, but we got like a package in the mail, I think twice from the same company, like of like, well, here's your newborn baby. And we were both like, we weren't planning on having another kid. So like somehow it thought that we were having like a 3rd kid, but we never did or never. So it's interesting just how even just what you do can be right sometimes and can be wrong, right?
Yeah.
And I've had that firsthand experience where it's like, well, you know, obviously I didn't want that company necessarily to have my data because it's wrong even, right?
Yeah, and I think the big thing people realize is also not companies aren't evil for trying to do so. The challenge we have is that this is how business models are built upon. This is how the industry works. But I think it's not going to stay the same. I think the idea of people having control over themselves, their digital identity, their footprints is going to happen. Like the world's going to change towards that. And it comes from consumers. We have to think about consumer first and people voicing that I don't like this. And it's already happening, which is why companies are being forced to rethink things and realizing the fact that the more they invest in privacy, it actually helps their brand, their retention. People actually want them more.
Sure. And then I also think people are willing to even maybe potentially share more with that company if they can control what they're sharing, right?
That's the secret that nobody actually gets in this industry, that what we say is that if you build practical privacy and give control to people, they will share more. Yeah. They may start out slow at first. They might be a little baby, like a baby steps into it. But as they feel comfortable with you as a brand, the way the company operates, then they'll share more. But we recognize that because companies are not consistent the way they do security and privacy, we think Cloak will be part of that answer to see how you can get into sharing more and more data without compromising yourself.
It's interesting because you almost enable people to share more, because they're basically saying, here's like a gate. And then you have to earn my trust, and I will share more with you over time. But if you don't gain my trust, I could just delete you, and then you never can contact me again.
That's right? Exactly the thinking. And we're starting with the basics of contacting you and communication, and we want to evolve to more of your data, where you own, and part of our vision is you own your data. Even Cloak doesn't have access to it. We're that layer in between that's helping moderate data going in and out from you, your person.
Got you. Okay. So as somebody that built a privacy first business, what advice do you give to other people that are maybe looking to do the same, or any other advice that you've learned maybe along the way?
Yeah, you think specifically in privacy, or just companies in general?
I think both, maybe both.
Yeah. So I think for us and me personally, for advice for privacy or companies in general, I always come back to my own experience that you want to solve meaningful problems. I think with my experience and background that I could easily go and work on another productivity tool or another thing that optimizes a SaaS subscription. And I said, there's nothing wrong with that. You can build a good business and solve some value. But I realized we're at a point now that we've grown a lot technologically, and people are saturated with apps that you want to solve fundamental problems. And that's where I get excited. I get excited by fundamental problems that people are facing, and there's an ill-defined solution for how do you make that smarter, better. And I think when approaching companies, approaching products, when you kind of dig deep into fundamental problems people have, it's exciting. It's complicated and challenging, but it's exciting. I think for people trying to think about privacy, there's a few key principles that you just have to think about. One, it all comes back to having definitions for what you're trying to accomplish. I broke the industry up into 3 words: security, privacy, and comfort. And I said security relates to encryption, fraud, fingerprinting. What is my vector of attack? I defined privacy as where does my data live? Who has access to it? What does it look like? But the third layer, which I focus on, is comfort. What I said earlier, where people actually have control and actually able to easily navigate the technology they're working with. So if you're working as a company trying to enable privacy or think about it as a whole, I think it comes back to making it part of your DNA. You're thinking about consumers. Do I even need this data? What information do I need? And how long do I need it? Do I think about how my consumer experience? Am I asking before I just request for everything? Do I just gather data for everywhere I go? Because if you move into an ask first mentality, you won't actually lose data. People are always afraid that I'm going to lose data. However, if you bring consumers into the model, you'll see that people, and they actually love your brand, the way you're thinking and operating, people opt in more. People choose to work with you and share. Now, not if you say, hey, would you like to share all of your data? Yes or no. That's a little different than actually giving visibility, clarity, what you're doing with the information, what's happening, putting it at the right moments, not just putting everything in the beginning. I think these types of experiences enable better privacy, better trust, and better trust leads to better attention. So I'd say simplifying control to be something that's intuitive, part of your experience, increasing visibility, understanding and dissecting what is the information you actually need, what can you do away with, what can you let live for a short amount of time. And then for your business, solve fundamental problems. When you do that, it's exciting, it's energizing, and you can make a big impact and have a much bigger multiple at the end of the day.
Yeah, interesting. No, I 100% agree with you. I'm curious though, because you've done so much in the space, how do you see kind of like Web3 and crypto and blockchain kind of, and the metaverse maybe playing into the privacy stuff? Do you think it's helpful, doesn't really change anything, or maybe it's a bit more detrimental?
Yeah, so I always have a lot of thoughts on Web3 and blockchain. One, I think we're fundamentally on the same mission. The idea, how do we change back control and change the hands of people, giving better ownership? Now, the only challenge I have is that the blockchain is viewed, it's like a hammer. People try to apply it to everything, if that's and I think the mission of Web3 and rethinking how data is accessed, what identity means, what is information to hold, what does it mean to hold information for a period of time. I think these principles all make sense. Rethinking how do we access applications as a whole. Now, the problem I have is the blockchain with that is the blockchain is a permanent public distributed ledger. Right. And just saying that out loud means that I can dox you forever. I can take your name, Kevin, and send you the meta description of a transaction, put it on the blockchain, and I can find out your address information. It's not permanently there. Now, data can be encrypted. I can watch, let's say you're making transactions on a future hypothetical app with, let's say, a pharmacy or a banking app. Maybe your information is encrypted, but I can pattern match. It's all public. I can watch and see what transactions you're making, who you're transacting with, and start to figure out things about you. Now, so having your information being distributed in public is inherently anti-privacy. However, if you can follow the same principles of put data ownership in the hands of people, taking my idea of the box in your own home where you own your information, now that's different than necessarily saying the blockchain. Now, I'm not saying the blockchain has no role in things. I think the blockchain is absolutely vital to think about how do we bring public visibility to data transactions, to maybe even accessing your data. So companies are telling the truth, but they're not secretly storing your data. They're accessing your information at runtime. They're only accessing information that they said they would. And I think that's where the two work together. But as blockchain and crypto as a one-size-fits-all solution, I don't think that's the case, especially when it relates to privacy, where people need to have the right to be forgotten, the right to disappear, the right to remove data, remove the fact maybe you weren't just having a third kid, and maybe the information was there for a little while, but you know what? Maybe I don't want it anymore. It should go. But you can't do that if everything's permanent. Yeah, and I think 100%. That's where you have to have a different mindset. And I think all these technologies are going to work together, but you have to view them as tools, as a tool that you figure out when to apply, not to just apply everywhere.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I find that with any of the kind of just trends as they've come and go or buzzwords, it's like, oh, everybody, we need to put this on the blockchain. It's like, yeah, but do you actually? Like, why? Like, what's the rationale that actually, just because it's a cool thing or the shiny new thing doesn't mean you need to adopt it. Because sometimes it makes sense and sometimes it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Sometimes it makes sense. And I say, you'd find that for all technologies. ChatGPT and OpenAI and all this works going to be the next type of thing where people say, well, now let's slap ChatGPT 3 and everything. And maybe it makes sense, maybe it doesn't. It's going to have to go through the same thinking around that.
Interesting. That was actually my next question to you is, how do you see maybe AI and kind of machine learning taking over some of this stuff? Do you think it's going to, or what's your predictions for some of that?
I think it's really great to see the advancements that are happening. ChatGPT and OpenAI is a huge advancement in how we're doing things. However, one thing I always say is that people mix machine learning and AI and these different words to kind of turn towards what people's dreams are, AGI, artificial general intelligence. People think that ChatGPT-3 and all these AI tools are artificial general intelligence, but we're not there. We're not there yet. Yeah. And I also, frankly, don't think we're going to be there in the current approach. I think AI as something that aggregates a lot of information. We've seen already lawsuits starting to pick up where OpenAI and DALL-E start to pull information from everywhere, where it's going to be invasive. It might know things that you publicly post at one point. It'll be trained in some model, and now AI knows about you, things that you wish it didn't. But it's too late. It's part of its index, part of the overall knowledge graph it's built. And then you think about biases. One of the things I say about AI is built on public data and public accessible information is that the loudest voices stick out. We saw an issue with there was racism. We saw some transgender challenges. We saw this idea that AI is copyright, this idea of copyright art. And then even the fact of Bing AI, which just came out, which is built on OpenAI, we're seeing it's funny on Reddit, people talking about, it seems very pensive. It's like very scared. And I think it's because this is the way you can train these models. And I think for me, one of the things is that aggregate machine learning is a very challenging concept where it's training on everybody, because you get spiky, loud people skewing information.
Right.
What machine learning and AI can move to, where my vision is that it's personalized. What if there's AI that's your AI? There's an Arjun AI, there's a Kevin AI, there's John's AI or Sally's AI. And the idea is that it's trained and learns on you. Then it actually could be a lot more practical and personal but not actually trying to train itself on everybody. And
Interesting.
however, that type of AI approach has to be built on trust and data ownership. Right now, people say that they have these little pop-ups that say, hey, would you like this personalized to you? Google Voice says that. Sorry, the Google Assistant, whenever you turn to silent, says, hey, would you like this to personalize? Problem is that that's personalizing on information it thinks, it gathers, it learns, and you have no understanding of it. If it's tied on your ownership, your information, then you have a say in what the learning looks like, what it knows, what it doesn't know. I think that's going to be the ultimate future. But I think the advances we're doing now are propelling the industry as a whole. So it's great to see.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. It's fascinating. I also think too, just being able to like decide what to give it down the road, and maybe it could give you almost like advice based on your historical whatever. Kevin, you would probably should make this call, and here's why, right? I think that's kind of some of the interesting stuff that could come from it, maybe, or based on the other data as well, you know?
I think that's exactly what my thinking is, that it could, if it studies you and helps you based on its knowledge, like that's the smarter approach. And its biases are your biases. Yeah. So it's, you at least resonate, and that way it's not trying to influence others as one approach. It's knowing that your information is interacting with somebody else's information, and there'll be some deltas, some differences, and consumer experiences, UI, UX is going to play into how those two interact.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Yeah, and I think just building almost on the fly based on personality, like interfaces or experiences in the physical world, I think would be actually really interesting.
Yeah, I'm excited. I think this is how the future ought to be. But OpenAI and how they're approaching things, and even how Google's going to compete in this space, they're going to pioneer to push a lot of things forward, and they've done the last couple decades. But I think the ultimate, it comes back to the blockchain challenge of that. What's going to be practically useful in my everyday life that fits within me? And I think a personal touch, personal ownership, and control are what make these types of things useful.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. But we're kind of coming to the end. So maybe, is there any other advice that you would give to startups or entrepreneurs, and then maybe close with mentioning where people can get more information about yourself and Cloaked?
For sure. I think, I guess advice for entrepreneurs starting business, there's a certain aspect of obsession that people need. I always think about that. Unless people start to think you're crazy about what you're trying to do, you're doing it wrong. Like why is he skipping X, Y, hanging out Friday nights, or the party on Saturday to go work on your company, your product? And I know there's a work-life balance and thinking about that, but mentally, the obsession you have with trying to do becomes a core philosophy to what you're trying to accomplish. I think for starting a company, building a product, you being connected to the problem you're trying to do goes a long way. That obsession ties in. Solving fundamental problems that people face lead to smarter, richer businesses, and that ones people can get behind. I think finding out when you're building your initial team, how do you amplify your core strengths and cover your weaknesses with your core team members? That's a good way to build a team. Not just trying to find, like, I'm trying to hire someone and fill this gap. How do you find people who amplify your good qualities and cover your bad qualities? And I think that's how you ripple outward to build a team. And I think we're seeing that the startup with VC investing starting to diminish and lower, and concentrating towards fewer companies. I think for you to make your mark, if you're following these early principles and taking meaningful problems, taking a deep stab at it, and working at it from your own personal obsession for this problem, that'll be how you differentiate yourself from everybody else. And I think product, and I think especially if you're back to Kevin, UI, UX, customer experience, or CX, which combines a lot of these principles together, is very important. If you're not in the customer experience side at the end of the day, it'll be weaker. I think that's kind of some advice, insights for entrepreneurs. I think about like one, for us, we have a chief customer experience officer, which I think is a new title, which people haven't seen before. But I think that's the mindset. And then for us at Cloaked, I think we're fundamentally trying to figure out how can we change the way you have control and view your own identity as you browse online. How do you view your own privacy? How do you have control over everything about you going on online and even in person? And so if you want to learn more about how Cloaked can put you in control, visit us at cloaked.app. We're right now in beta, but we're pulling people off the wait list every day. So happy to join, and feel free to reach out to us directly and give us feedback, and we're rapidly iterating as we're getting to market.
Very cool. Well, Arjun, I really appreciate you again taking the time out here to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you, and have a good rest of your day, man.
Thanks. Same here. Appreciate it, Kevin.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Bye.
Bye.